Across Europe, human settlement has never been random. Villages, farms, and towns emerged where terrain, climate, and resources briefly aligned in favor of long-term occupation. Valleys offered water and fertile soils. Mountain passes enabled seasonal movement and trade. River plains supported agriculture, transport, and population growth. Yet these landscapes were never static. They shifted slowly, often imperceptibly, reshaping the conditions that once made human permanence possible. From the late prehistoric period through the medieval era, European communities lived within narrow ecological margins. Temperature ranges, rainfall stability, soil depth, and forest composition determined not only where people settled, but how long those settlements endured. Environmental stress did not arrive as a single disruptive force. It accumulated. Year after year, small changes altered the relationship between people and land, long before abandonment became visible. In upland regions such as the Alps, the Apennines, and the Carpathians, settlements depended on seasonal predictability. Short growing seasons demanded precise timing. Minor shifts in temperature or snowfall lengthened winters, delayed planting, and reduced yields. Archaeological surveys reveal that many high-altitude communities persisted for centuries before thinning gradually. Houses were rebuilt fewer times. Storage structures became smaller. Paths once maintained year-round turned into seasonal routes, then disappeared altogether. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to Primal Roots. Lowland environments faced different pressures. Floodplains and wetlands offered rich soils but required constant management. Small changes in precipitation or river dynamics altered water tables and flood cycles. In some regions, rivers migrated laterally over decades, cutting off fields from irrigation sources. Elsewhere, sediment buildup reduced navigability, weakening trade connections that once sustained local economies. These were not sudden disasters. They were slow geomorphological adjustments, unfolding across generations. Human adaptation initially succeeded. Communities diversified crops, introducing hardier cereals and legumes. Forest clearance expanded arable land. Pastoralism intensified in marginal soils. Architectural styles shifted toward insulation and storage efficiency. These adjustments reflect resilience, not fragility. Paleobotanical data shows deliberate land use strategies, not environmental ignorance. People understood their landscapes. What they could not easily perceive was how close those landscapes were moving toward ecological thresholds. As forests were cleared, soil exposure increased. Erosion followed. Nutrient-rich topsoil thinned gradually, reducing long-term fertility. Pollen records from lake sediments reveal this transition clearly. Agricultural indicators decline while forest species rebound, not abruptly, but incrementally. This pattern repeats across Europe, from upland plateaus to riverine plains. Human pressure weakened ecosystems just enough that natural variability became destabilizing. Climate variability amplified these stresses. Periods of cooling shortened growing seasons in the north and at elevation. Warmer intervals increased evapotranspiration, drying soils in already marginal regions. Changes in rainfall distribution mattered more than averages. A single failed harvest rarely caused abandonment. Repeated marginal harvests did. Over time, surplus disappeared. Buffer capacity eroded. Communities remained physically present, but economically exposed. Location, once an advantage, became a constraint. Settlements optimized for past conditions found themselves locked into landscapes that no longer responded as before. Relocation was costly. Infrastructure, fields, and social memory tied people to place. Instead of moving immediately, communities adapted incrementally, extracting more from land that yielded less in return. This phase marks the beginning of quiet disappearance, not collapse, not crisis, but gradual decoupling between human effort and environmental reward. Archaeological layers grow thinner, occupation becomes intermittent, seasonal absence turns permanent. What remains is not ruin, but silence. The landscape did not expel its inhabitants. It simply stopped sustaining them. Human settlement across Europe was shaped not only by environmental opportunity, but by the ability to adjust when that opportunity narrowed. Adaptation was not a single strategy. It was a continuous process, unfolding across lifetimes, shaped by landscape, biology, and accumulated experience. For centuries, European communities modified how they farmed, moved, stored food, and interacted with surrounding ecosystems. These adaptations delayed abandonment. They did not always prevent it. Archaeological and paleo-environmental research shows that most settlements persisted through multiple phases of environmental stress before disappearing. This persistence is crucial to understanding what followed. Communities did not fail to adapt. They adapted repeatedly, often successfully, until ecological and demographic thresholds were crossed. In agricultural regions, adaptation began with diversification. Crop assemblages shifted in response to changing temperature and moisture regimes. Archaeobotanical evidence reveals a gradual replacement of climate-sensitive grains with more resilient species, including barley, rye, and legumes. These choices reduced risk, but often lowered overall caloric yield. Fields expanded laterally to compensate, increasing labor demands and accelerating soil exhaustion. Soil profiles from long-occupied sites reveal this pattern clearly. Micromorphological analysis shows progressive thinning of fertile horizons, combined with compaction from repeated use. Initially, these changes were manageable. Over time, productivity declined below the threshold needed to sustain population size. This decline was rarely catastrophic. It was incremental, measurable only across generations. In upland landscapes, adaptation took a different form. Pastoralism intensified as cultivation became less reliable. Seasonal transhumance expanded, linking highland and lowland zones through cyclical movement. This strategy distributed risk across multiple ecological niches, yet it also depended on predictable seasonal transitions. Paleoclimate reconstructions indicate that increased climatic variability disrupted these rhythms, shortening summer grazing periods and extending winters beyond stored fodder capacity. The result was not immediate abandonment, but demographic stress. Bioanthropological studies of skeletal remains from marginal settlements show increasing indicators of nutritional strain. Reduced stature, delayed growth, and elevated markers of physiological stress appear more frequently in later occupation phases. These patterns suggest adaptation at the cost of biological well-being. Settlement organization also changed. Houses became smaller. Construction materials shifted toward locally available resources, reducing transport costs. Storage structures increased in relative frequency, reflecting heightened concern for surplus retention. These changes indicate foresight and environmental awareness. They also signal declining margins. Location became increasingly decisive. Settlements that once thrived at ecological edges found themselves constrained by geography. Valleys narrowed by erosion. Rivers altered their courses. Wetlands expanded or contracted unpredictably. In some regions, drainage systems constructed generations earlier became ineffective as sediment accumulated. Maintaining them required coordinated labor that shrinking populations could no longer supply. Research synthesized by the Pages 2K Consortium demonstrates that late Holocene climate variability across Europe was spatially uneven. Some regions experienced cooling and increased precipitation, Others faced warming and drought stress. What mattered most was not the magnitude of change, but the interaction between climate signals and local land use history. Landscapes already stressed by deforestation, grazing, or intensive agriculture responded more sharply to even modest climatic shifts. Historical climatology further supports this interpretation. Studies by Michael McCormick and colleagues, integrating ice core data, tree rings, and historical records, show that periods of climatic instability correlated with gradual settlement contraction rather than sudden collapse. The archaeological record aligns with this model. Occupation layers thin, artifact densities decline, activity becomes intermittent. Adaptation also had social limits. As environmental returns diminished, younger individuals were more likely to leave. Seasonal migration became permanent relocation. This selective outmigration altered community structure, reducing reproductive potential and labor availability. Remaining populations aged. Social networks weakened. The capacity for collective action declined precisely when it was most needed. Importantly, abandonment was rarely perceived as failure. From an evolutionary and ecological perspective, mobility is a valid adaptive response. Leaving a marginal environment preserves biological continuity, even as place-based identity dissolves. What disappears from the landscape is not humanity, but permanence. This distinction matters. The archaeological silence that follows abandonment is often misinterpreted as sudden loss. In reality, it represents the end point of prolonged negotiation between humans and environment. Adaptation delayed that outcome for centuries. It could not reverse the underlying trajectory once ecological feedbacks intensified. The limits of place were not defined by climate alone. They emerged from the cumulative interaction of human decisions, biological constraints, and environmental variability. Once crossed, recovery became unlikely, even if conditions temporarily improved. By the time fields lay fallow and paths vanished, the critical threshold had already passed. By the time European settlements disappeared from the landscape, the process that sealed their fate had long been underway. What followed was not collapse, but withdrawal. Abandonment did not arrive as a moment of rupture. It emerged as a sequence of rational decisions, distributed across households, generations, and social networks, responding to environments that no longer justified permanence. In archaeological terms, abandonment is defined by absence. Yet absence is not emptiness, it is evidence of choice. The thinning of occupation layers, the reduction of material culture, and the disappearance of maintenance activities reflect a gradual disengagement from place. Fields were not destroyed. They were left untended. Structures were not burned. They were allowed to decay. This pattern repeats across Europe, from upland hamlets to lowland river settlements. Location once structured opportunity. Over time, it imposed constraint. Settlements anchored to specific ecological configurations found themselves increasingly inflexible. Irrigation systems could not follow shifting rivers. Terraces could not regenerate exhausted soils without sustained labor. Pastures could not recover under continued grazing pressure. The landscape changed faster than fixed infrastructure could adapt. As environmental returns diminished, mobility became advantageous. Seasonal movement expanded spatial awareness beyond the immediate settlement. Networks of kinship and exchange extended into more productive regions. What began as temporary absence became permanent relocation. Archaeologically, this transition is nearly invisible. It leaves no destruction layer, no marker of crisis, only silence. From an evolutionary perspective, this silence represents success rather than failure. Human survival has always depended on flexibility, not attachment to place. The decision to abandon a marginal environment preserves population continuity, even as it dissolves localized cultural footprints. Landscapes empty. Lineages continue elsewhere. Bioanthropological data reinforces this interpretation. In many regions, skeletal evidence indicates improving health metrics after periods of settlement contraction. Populations that relocated into more favorable environments experienced better nutritional outcomes and reduced physiological stress. Abandonment redistributed people toward landscapes with higher carrying capacity. Environmental recovery followed human departure. Forest succession advanced into former fields. Soil stability improved as erosion slowed. Wetlands regenerated. Pollen records consistently show ecological rebound after abandonment, often within decades. This recovery was not immediate, but it was measurable. The absence of sustained human pressure allowed ecosystems to re-establish equilibrium. Importantly, this recovery confirms that environmental stress was not solely external. Human land use amplified vulnerability. Once that pressure ceased, landscapes demonstrated resilience. The disappearance of settlements therefore marks a turning point, not just in human history, but in ecological trajectories. Yet, not all places recovered equally. Some environments had crossed irreversible thresholds. Severe soil loss, hydrological alteration, or long-term vegetation change limited regeneration. These landscapes remained marginal long after humans left. The memory of occupation persisted only in subtle geomorphological signatures, detectable through scientific analysis rather than visible ruins. Historical narratives often privilege dramatic endings: invasion, collapse, catastrophe. The scientific record tells a quieter story. Most European settlements ended without violence, without spectacle, without witnesses who recognized the final moment. They ended because adaptation reached its limit within a specific location. This distinction reframes how disappearance is understood. Abandonment was not an endpoint imposed by nature. It was a negotiated outcome between human agency and environmental constraint. People stayed as long as effort produced return. They left when that balance inverted. Across centuries, this pattern shaped the human geography of Europe. Populations concentrated in zones of ecological reliability. Marginal landscapes emptied, then refilled intermittently during favorable climatic windows. Settlement history became cyclical, not linear. Presence and absence alternated in rhythm with environmental conditions. Scientific uncertainty remains. Archaeology cannot always resolve the precise timing of departure. Paleoclimate data varies in resolution. Social factors intersect with environmental ones in complex ways. Yet the overarching pattern is robust. Environmental stress rarely erased settlements through force. It eroded the incentives that sustained them. The silence of abandoned landscapes is therefore instructive. It records not failure, but ecological negotiation. It reveals how slow change shapes human decisions more effectively than sudden shock. It demonstrates that resilience has limits, defined by biology, environment, and time. Understanding this past reshapes how the present is viewed. Modern societies possess technologies that buffer environmental stress, but not indefinitely. The archaeological record suggests that thresholds often become visible only in retrospect. By the time abandonment is obvious, adaptation has already been exhausted. European landscapes still carry these lessons. Beneath forests, beneath fields, beneath modern infrastructure, lie traces of settlements that once fit their environments precisely until they no longer did. Their disappearance was not dramatic. It was methodical, rational, and silent. In that silence, science finds its clearest signal. If these silent landscapes changed how the past is understood, Consider what today's environments are quietly recording, and what future archaeologists may one day read in our absence.